Once the siren starts wailing, Israelis have about 13 minutes to get into a shelter, because that's the amount of time it takes for an Iranian ballistic missile to reach this country. This evening we watched as Iran fired its most potent weapons at the prime target that is downtown Tel Aviv. Some of what we saw come crashing down were the remnants of missiles hit by Israeli interceptors. They have a high success rate, but they don't strike everything incoming. Here, seconds after 2 interceptors were fired from close to military headquarters, an Iranian missile came in. The Iranians fired an estimated 150 ballistic missiles. The Israelis don't want the Iranians to hear details about where exactly was struck, but local television networks are reporting unprecedented consequences in terms of damage and destruction. The fate of Tel Aviv and other places depends on a very simple piece of arithmetic. Do the Iranians have enough ballistic missiles to overwhelm the Israeli defensive shield? We're going to find that out, I think, over the next 72 hours or so. Today began with Israel's most comprehensive attack ever on important places and people in Iran. And while darkness provided cover initially, the IDF were brazen enough to continue the assault in broad daylight. Israel has wargamed this for years, but now, out of the blue, what they're calling Operation Rising Lion has been unleashed for real and in a big way. The most significant target of all was probably the nuclear plant at Natanz, about 130 miles southeast of Tehran. It's where most of Iran's centrifuges have been set up to enrich uranium, perhaps up to weapons grade. For the Israelis, Natanz is the heart of the matter.
And if not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year. This is a clear and present danger to Israel's very survival.
As well as nuclear sites, they went after key personnel, killing at least 6 nuclear scientists and some of the military's top brass, including the commander of the Republican Guard, General Hussein Salami, and General Mohammad Bagheri, the chief of staff of Iran's armed forces. The Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has described the attack as criminal. The Islamic Republic of Iran's legitimate and powerful response will make the enemy regret its stupid act, he said. The IDF have released this footage of drone strikes on missile transporters and launchers. Remarkably, it appears the drones were dispatched locally by Mossad agents actually on the ground in Iran. For their part, the Americans say they were not involved in any of this, although President Trump has already warned Iran there may be more to come. On social media, he said, "They are all dead now and it will only get worse, with the next already planned attacks being even more brutal. Iran must make a deal before there's nothing left." This morning, we watched Israeli warplanes streak across the sky to meet incoming drones, Iran's first volley of retaliatory fire. This evening, they unleashed their second and third volleys, and some of this country's worst fears have been realized. Tonight, Israel and Iran are at war. John Irvine, News at 10, Tel Aviv.
Well, to contemplate that further, Rohit is here to take us through. This feels like there are great fears for further regional war, but this moment, Iran and Israel at war, is a moment in history.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, we often sit here discussing escalation and brinkmanship, but let's be clear, this is now a direct conflict between Iran and Israel. This is not an operation. This is not a strike. This is a sustained campaign. And Netanyahu made that pretty clear tonight, that he felt that this was indeed a war. Multiple red lines have been crossed. And the damage is still being assessed tonight in Israel. You know, have a look at this shot there. And actually, here's the live picture from what appears to be a residential building, which is right next to the Ministry of Defense. It appears that Iran may well have been trying to strike the Ministry of Defense, but instead hit an apartment block nearby. This means that perhaps red lines in Israel's mind have been crossed, a built-up area, perhaps an attempt to strike government infrastructure as well. And, you know, there are two clear objectives for Israel. The first was clear immediately, to try to strike the nuclear program in Iran. But the second became clear in the last couple of hours. We heard Benjamin Netanyahu in his most recent address tonight. He was making it pretty clear, inviting the people of Iran to overthrow the government there, to overthrow the regime. And so the intentions of the Israeli government in this operation are clear. What is less clear is where this all ends.
Indeed. And I suppose, given the escalation that we have witnessed just in the last 24 hours, very many people will be wondering what brought us to this particular point today, now, and indeed looking ahead to where it goes next. But why was this the moment?
Well, according to the Israelis, it was because of their suspicion that Iran was perilously close to getting a nuclear weapon. They said that they had intelligence which indicated this. But I think they chose this moment as well. Let's look at this map, because you see the regional picture where so many of their proxies are in place but have been weakened. Hezbollah in Lebanon, in Gaza, Hamas as well, the Houthis in Yemen, and zoom in and we see the picture here in Iran where so many of those sites were struck overnight. Almost certainly now, though, in the next few hours, we expect to see further strikes inside Iran. Prime Minister Netanyahu made that pretty much clear tonight.
OK, Rohit, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, spoke to the US President tonight, both calling for diplomacy and dialogue. We'll get some detail out of Washington very shortly, but let's cross first of all to Harry in Downing Street to just take us through what we've heard from there tonight, Harry.
Well, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has spent the day phoning world leaders, including President Trump. And what we're told keeps coming up in those conversations from the Prime Minister is him urging the need for de-escalation. It doesn't appear those calls have had much impact so far. There is very real concern in government about the very real risk of further instability in the wider Middle East. Keir Starmer did speak to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier this afternoon. He said that Israel had the right to defend itself, but talked about the need for a diplomatic solution. But look, relations between the UK and Israel have deteriorated quite significantly in recent weeks because of the situation in Gaza. And unlike President Trump, the UK government, it's fair to say, didn't get any heads up from Israel that it was planning those airstrikes last night. The Trump administration was given advance warning. Now, the Foreign Secretary was due to travel to Washington today for a meeting with his counterpart over there. That meeting was cancelled so that David Lammy could coordinate the response of the Foreign Office here.
This is a moment of grave peril in the Middle East, and we are urging restraint and de-escalation.
Now, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary heading to Canada this weekend for face-to-face meetings with G7 leaders, including President Trump. And I think it's fair to say that the situation in the Middle East will now be top of the agenda there. OK, Harry, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, let's get some more international reaction. We'll speak in a moment to John in Tel Aviv and Emma in Istanbul. First, though, let's go to Stacey in Washington. It's been very interesting watching the president today, Stacey, and quite remarkable that we haven't heard perhaps more from him. What is he likely to do next?
Well, look, Donald Trump pledged to be the president to bring peace to the Middle East. But tonight, make no mistake, the US is involved in perhaps one of the biggest military escalations that we've seen in that region, with US forces now directly involved in helping to intercept missiles fired by Iran into Israel. A White House official has told us tonight that the president has spoken on the phone with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We don't have any more details about that call, but despite the events of the last 24 hours, President Trump has still been speaking today about striking a nuclear deal with Iran. He doesn't think that all is lost here, and far from derailing the ongoing talks, he perhaps hopes or even believes that this escalation could force the Iranians back around the negotiating table. We know that a US delegation is planning to travel to Oman at the weekend, where talks are scheduled to resume on Sunday, but the Iranians are saying that those talks are off.
Okay, Stacey, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's cross then to Tel Aviv and speak to John, who witnessed those missile strikes unfolding in pretty dramatic fashion earlier. John, a quite extraordinary statement from the Israeli PM a little earlier. What is the latest from where you are tonight?
Well, Julie, thankfully right now things are quiet, but as we know from what happened 3 hours ago, things can go downhill within minutes. Now, the IDF are claiming that of the 150 Iranian ballistic missiles sent this way, they intercepted 97%, which means something like 5 they tried to hit got through. Regarding the human toll, Julie, we're hearing that 44 people have been hospitalized and there's been 1 fatality. That casualty number is low because every Israeli building, every Israeli home has a bomb shelter in it. And after more than 18 months of missile attacks by Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis and Iran, Israelis know to get into those bomb shelters pretty quickly when the alarm sounds. Now, I think today's events over the next 24 hours will probably be repeated. There'll be more Israeli strikes on Iran, and the Iranians will try to hit back. Since the last big Iranian barrage on this country in October last year, the Americans estimate that the Iranians have manufactured something like 50 new ballistic missiles every month. That's 400 new missiles on top of their already large arsenal. For the Israelis, that could be a big problem.
OK, John, thank you very much indeed for that. And finally, let's cross to Emma, who's in Istanbul, our international editor. I mean, this is clearly an enormous moment of jeopardy. Where is there room for things perhaps to be pulled back a bit, do you think? And what is the wider global perspective on it?
Well, I think in terms of the room for things to be pulled back, it's significantly smaller than the room for things to go horribly wrong and escalate in this situation. Because as we've seen in the actions and the images of the past 24 hours, we have 2 sides here who are on very much an escalatory ladder and don't seem to be taking much note of the voices like those from other world leaders who are calling for some form of de-escalation. In fact, the Iranians very much today reacting with a sense of anger about those calls, saying that they're under attack and why should they even consider de-escalation. Now, the real issue is a misstep, because if there is a misstep in this situation, it will really raise the stakes so very significantly. We have seen over so many months and years these 2 countries waging a proxy war, but the difference now is that they are going head to head on their own territories, and they are doing it with a real sense of everything to play for. And I think that we have to remember how we got to this position in the first place. You know, Iran were pretty much obliging with the nuclear deal until 2018, when Donald Trump pulled out of it. He now says that he wants to get them back into some kind of order, and clearly feels that he can perhaps use Israel to bomb Iran back to the negotiating table. That could be an incredibly risky strategy, and the man who came into his presidency saying that he didn't want to be involved in forever wars in the Middle East may be at the heart of one.